object that its only instance is that right there in the hierarchy and in the scene. What you can do is create prefabs, which are essentially templates for objects. And so let's say you wanted to create 10 of these bouncy balls. Well, then you can have one prefab and essentially create many of them. And they'll all have the same properties, and say I change the properties on that ball in the prefab, the master one, it'll change all the properties on all the things that are created from it. So what I can do here is I can right click and say create prefab, and then call this a ball, and then I can drag this sphere down into this prefab, and so it automatically, oh actually I can create another one. When you drag it down here, it creates a prefab automatically. And let's call that one ball. So as you can see, I've got sort of in my project a prefab that I can use other places. And when you look over here, it's maybe a little hard to see, but when you select the ball, it highlights all the things that are using that prefab. And so I can go in here, and I can just drag out more of these. Drag them up here. And I can create another ball. And let's see if I can move that. I can move that one, so I've got a second one. And when I hit play, they both, are behaving the same, because they're essentially the same thing. And I can also go in here and say, what do I do? Let's just change. So now I've selected the prefab down here, and I can change the size. Like I can do 2, right? And it's changing all the instances of that prefab. So like bullets, or I'm trying to think of other things. You could literally have prefabs for enemies or tanks or something like that, right? So that you don't have to set up the AI for every single instance of a tank or a player, right? So, set these back. So now I've got a prefab, and the idea that I'm going to do is have the player input and create an instance of one of these spheres, one of these balls. So let's see. So what I can do again is have a game object. Is how you can specify that it's a prefab. I can say that. So that's my variable. And let's see. Then I can update. I can go through and do some logic to actually check that that they pressed a key to create the object. Usually I make these public. I don't know if you actually need to make these public or not. So in this case, I'm going to check for the fire event. And what this does is, here, I'll just show you. If input dot get button up, I'm going to look for fire 1. And then I can do something like fire. So what I'm doing is I'm going to call this fire button, right? And fire is sort of an abstraction of the control devices. So fire in this case is actually linked to the mouse click and the control key. So if you're just using the keyboard, it would just, when you hit control, it'll fire. And it'll also fire when you hit the mouse button. So how that works is, and what that does is it kind of allows you to do configuration. Like in settings, you can change the configuration of what button does what action, and you don't have to change all your code. It's kind of a one layer above an abstraction there. So if you go to Edit, Project Settings, and Input, you can see what these names, these key names match to. So if you go in here, there's the fire 1, and it goes to the left control, and it also goes to the mouse 0, which is the left click.
Where do you find that again?
That's in project settings and then input.
Is it the same on the Mac?
Yeah, pretty much. I've watched videos of people doing stuff on Mac, and it looks the same. I think even like control is the same as their controls are the same. You know. All right. So then, what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to attach to the camera, and I'm going to use that as sort of a point of reference. So to create objects. So what I'm going to do is create this fire function. So this game object. So what I can do is say this.game object. So this is referring to this component, and the component is attached to a game object. So I can basically get a reference to what this component is attached to by using this game object. So I'm going to say game object obj equals this game object. And then I'm going to create a new thing. So I'm going to create a new object. And this is, I want to create an instance of that sphere. Actually, it's going to be an instance of this prefab, whatever you attach to this. So in this case, I'm going to make it another bouncy ball, basically. So what I can do here is I'm going to do a cast. But game object dot instantiate. So it's going to create a new object, and it's going to be at the, I'm going to use the prefab as what it's going to create. So this is the original item. And then I'm going to use the position and rotation of the object, which is, in this case, going to be the camera. So obj dot, I think it's transform dot position. Right? So the first parameter is position, and then obj dot transform dot rotation. So there's your rotation there. So again, this kind of corresponds. Let's go back over here. So here's your transform component. So that's why it's game object or object dot transform and then dot position, dot rotation, dot scale. So again, they kind of, it all just works, and you can see all, most of the, or I think all the public properties are basically shown in this user interface. Okay. And now, basically, I wanted to give it some velocity. So what would happen is it would create that object, and it would just drop, and I wouldn't see it because I'm looking out at the scene, and it would drop below me. So I want to give it some velocity, basically in the direction that I'm at. So I can go do object dot, let's see, rigid body dot velocity equals object dot transform dot forward. So this is sort of a nice property that's in there that tells you basically which direction it's pointed and gets a vector 3, so an XYZ vector in the direction that you're pointed. So in this case, it's the direction that the camera's pointed. So that's kind of a really nice thing. So like if you had an enemy that rotated, you could just do dot forward and you know which direction it's moving. And then I'm just going to multiply that by like a velocity, 25 to get units. Okay, I think that's it. So then I have my main camera, and I'm going to attach that player input component. And so I've got that here, and then that prefab is what I need to choose, so I can choose this ball here. And then let's see, run. And I can click, and there you go. I've got a ball that just gets created. And as you can see, So I can do this a bunch of times, click, click, and it creates all these balls. And I go flying off into outer space. And what you see is all these clones are getting created. And if you can see over here, they're actually still falling, right? Because I don't have anything to catch them. I'm just going to be lazy and not deal with that, but you probably want a floor or something, or have where they get destroyed. But yeah, so that's the idea. So as you can see, when I stop, they all go away. So that's how you can create an object just kind of on the fly. And so like a bullet or whatever, throw a grenade, you know, create a character, all that stuff. All right, any questions on that? Okay, so if I go back to this, what I'm going to do is try to, right now, the other thing was I can hit control, right? I can hit control and fire. But I'm stuck now sort of in this view. So what I'd like to do is sort of create a first person kind of rotation. So if I go back to the camera, there is a mouse look control or a component that was part again of the character control. And actually what it has is there's a whole first person controller. So if you see in here, it's got all the mouse look stuff, it's got the input for like arrow keys and looking up and down, and it's got the physics component, it's got a simulated person with like the camera and everything. And it's got a third-person version of that. So, like, if you wanted a first-person shooter, you just drag that into the scene, and you have a first-person kind of movement and look. And for this, I'm just not gonna. I don't need to deal with all that. So I was just gonna drag on this mouse look control. And so that's again attached to the camera. And let's see if this works. Now I can look around, and then I can fire in all kinds of different directions. So, really, because of the nice development that they've done already in the components, I didn't have to do very much to make it into a simple kind of fun thing to just shoot balls, bouncy balls everywhere. So.
Do me a favor. Do terrain.
All right. Let's see, what else do I want to do? I think I'm going to go ahead and work on sort of building this into an actual game. So we'll take this sort of fun simulation thing and make it actually into a game. We'll call it like Angry Boxes. So it'll be a sort of a Angry Birds type clone. So we're going to have where you knock the boxes off, you know, the ground, and they're basically. So, okay, so what we're going to do is, let's see, I'm going to create a new, let's create a cube. And I'm going to move it here. There's that cube. And then I'll create another cube. The idea is that this cube is going to be sort of the one you have to knock onto the ground. And maybe we can add a texture to that. So we've got, do you have a picture here? And I can go in here. So here's my texture that I've loaded as a picture. And I can go and create a material. So as you kind of saw before, we had, when we did the physics material, we can also create just an image for texturing. So picture one.
Did you right click or did you use that create
I just right-clicked anywhere kind of in the scene, in the project, and say create.
Does the box work as well?
The box, where?
No, not too far up in the same window.
Yeah, oh, yeah, it's the same thing.
The same thing? Okay.
Yep. And you can create folders and things. I just used to right-click.
Positions on ad hoc.
And I think you can actually like drag things in and create materials automatically or something.
See the bubbles?
So there's my picture one material,
They don't have
and I'm going to select it as the actual image that I wanted. Right? And so then now, if I go over to say this sphere, I can pick which material I want. And I think just drag that on there. And so now it's got a texture associated with it. And it's just kind of a special thing. And again, we've got to add some properties to that. So I'm going to go ahead and add the physics, rigid body again. We'll do that for this one too. Physics, rigid body. So if I go run the simulation again, fire. There you go. Okay, and so what we want is this to sort of have a special behavior. It's the, I guess, the angry box that you're trying to knock on the ground to get points for. So what we'll do is we'll create a new component to kind of deal with that. So we're going to go new C# component. So cube component. Oh, it's called box. All right, box. So I'm going to open that. Oh, wrong thing, I think. Box component. You just double click and it brings up in the mono editor. So what I'm going to do, what's nice about this is that it's almost like it has all the features of C#. So I can derive my collision component, or derive this box component from the collision component that I created earlier, because I want it to, whenever it hits something, play a sound effect. I'm going to want to inherit that behavior. So I'm going to change this to be collision component. And so I'm deriving from that collision component this box component. And that's kind of why earlier I just went ahead and did the shortcut and made one of the things virtual. So let's see. So on the update, let's see. What I'm going to do is basically create, let's see, we can create a sound effect, like a different sound effect when it hits the ground, and like a particle effect, like an explosion or something, when it also hits the ground. So what we'll do is, in the update, actually not the update, in the collision, right? So we're going to get that collision. Okay. And this time we're going to override, right? Override that behavior. So we're going to override that on collision enter to do some logic. So we can do, we need to be able to figure out if it hit the floor instead of something else, like it could have a wall or whatever. So we're going to basically check things by name. So if we go here, collision dot game object dot name equals, let's say, floor. Right? So if it equals the floor, then we'll do something, right? So if we go back over here, we're going to have to name our floor so that we can get a reference to that. So we have this big kind of plane here, and let's actually make it bigger. 20 by 20. Let's make this one a little bigger too. Say 5 by 5 by 5. Oops. And this is going to be our floor that we want to attach. We want the angry cube to fall on, and that's how you get a point. So what we want to do is call this floor. So that's the name. As you can see, these all have names. And so I can give it floor. Oh, I have to hit enter basically to have them saved. So this is my floor. And then these are other just kind of things that can collide with that cube. So let's go back over to our code. So now that we've named it, we can reference it by its name. And I guess we can go ahead and do, so when things collide, it's inheriting that audio that gets played. But in this case, we want to say, have a special audio sound for when it hits the floor. So we'll go ahead and create another audio clip. Audio clip, and we'll say the die sound, right? So when this angry box dies, we're going to play a different sound. And so then when I hit the floor here, I can say audio dot clip equals die sound. Actually, let's just play it one shot. And let's see. And it would be the die sound, right? And let's see. Let's go with that. So then if we go over here and we've got our box component, and we're going to attach it to this one, sort of a special thing. So we're going to go back over here. And so we've got our box component, and it's got a script, and we're going to say it's inheriting the collision sound, so we're going to get that one. It's the same. And then we'll say the die sound is this explosion. Right? And so if we play this, you can see, well, it's kind of hard to hear, but over here we're playing and it plays sounds. And then if there's no audio source attached to it. So as you see, it's trying to play that other audio clip. So if we go in here, components, audio source. We've got an audio source, we'll have to play. Let's try this again. There we go. We've got audio. Oh, I'm going to, okay, that's what it was. So they're falling, and then if I, right. So as you can hear, let's do this again. Run it up again. Did you hear it? It played twice. Right? Yeah. So we kind of want it just to play once. So it hits the ground and has an explosion. So let's say we just need to basically say that it's already died. So we can do a private Boolean, say it is dead, false, right? And then up here we can add a check. So and not is dead. And when we hit the ground here, say is dead equals true. So now if we go back over here and play.
So every instance of that box, if you made more, they all would have that property, have those properties. Can you make another instance of the same box?
Yeah, you can.
It'll always explode.
Correct. So if you made a prefab, which is they're all kind of linked, they're all the same, almost the same object type almost. They would all have the same properties. So in this case, you would have to set up that audio every time, but they would all have those properties, and you could decide which audio to play. And that's the nice thing about components is I can reuse these components over and over. So if I wanted some other kind of object when it hits the floor to play a different sound, I don't have to rewrite a new component. I just change that audio property. And I'm going to go ahead and make it is dead equals false again. And let's see what else is there. So the other thing was to kind of create that explosion effect, right? So this is where, I'm going to see if I can get a cool particle effect. RunJumpDev is helping me with this. So we've got our fire. We're going to create a material. Let's call it explosion.
Is that just a movie?
This is actually just a picture. And the idea is I'm going to use the particle system and kind of spew flames. I don't think this texture is actually right for doing it with particles because it doesn't have the kind of transparency effect. But you would have a flame texture with transparency in it, and it just kind of spawns a cloud of these flames, and it creates a cool effect. And then I haven't done much with this, but you know, you can combine that with two different types of things. So maybe it has red, and then it changes it to black. So it kind of turns from the fire into a smoke, you know, and you can combine different materials in this particle effect. So you can create some pretty amazing things when you play with these particle systems. So I dragged in my material, or sorry, my texture, and then I created a material from that, which was explosion. And let's say I want to fire that explosion. And then I'm going to create a particle system. And so this is going to be my particle that is going to emit these flames. So if I go down here, and on my material, I pick the explosion effect. And then, let's see, if I go to size, let's say 1, 1, it's kind of hard to see. Let's go back up here. So it's kind of making these particle effects. Maybe do. So it's kind of creating all these particle flames essentially there. And can do things like change kind of their velocity. So I want like more of an explosion. So let's see, I think it's 18. So kind of now they're going in both X and Y, and then I can go 16. And so it kind of explodes in a effect here. The other thing is I don't want it to just do this forever. I want it to be a one-shot kind of thing. And it will just, boom, there's my particle exploding. And another thing is that it keeps that object around, right? Because it's the emitter is sort of an object and then all these particles that it creates. But it still kind of exists. So in this case, it's just an explosion for something, and so I want to auto-destruct that object. So that's kind of the effect that I want, and what I'm going to do is create a prefab out of that, right? So I'm going to say this is my, so I just dragged it down there, and I'm going to say this is the explosion particles. Actually, I don't want the original in here, so I'm just going to delete that item. And so I've still got this prefab, and I don't have the original in my scene. That was really just for me to create that and to test it and everything. So now, if I go back over here, I need a way to reference that explosion. So like we did before, with where we created copies of the sphere, I'm going to create copies of this explosion effect. So if I go public, game object, and I've got the die prefab. Right? And so what I'm going to do up here is when you die, I'm going to kind of do what we did before with creating a sphere, a ball. I'm going to say game object that instantiate. I'm going to use the die prefab. And just dot transform that position. And then this is transform. Rotation. Should be let's see what so whatever game object this is attached to is going to create the die prefab, which is that explosion is the idea. Let's do that.
Isn't this is your instance of the box, so this dot transform will be where this instance is?
It might be.
Well, this is the component.
This is the component, I think.
Yeah. So we need
This
to
is
Right,
get
the
game
instance of the box.
Well, it's
Well,
just
the
the
box
box
component.
component. The game
Right.
object is what's in world space.
Yeah, so I need to actually reference so I'm going to attach this component to that box. So I need to know the transform position of that box, not the component. At least that's how I think it works. So you need to say this.gameObject to see which object I'm attached to, which component, which, because this is
So the
this
object's
component
instance is a property of the component.
of the component, yeah. And it's kind of, I think, just wired up for you in Unity. So you don't have to do
How do I
anything.
see the grid?
Okay, so let's see if it works.
I don't have a grid.
All right. Oh, I need to define it. The box component. So I've got the die. That's not good. Oh, yeah. And explosion. Let's do my action. Let's do this. Rename this so I can tell which one it is. And I can drag that box component. So now it's got the box component, it's got the explosion, gun silencer, and particle effects. So let's try that again. Now that I've attached it to that. Awesome!
What happened to the color stuff?
I'm not sure. I think it does some adjustment to the colors and things.
There's a problem with the material, I think,
Yeah,
or the,
yeah.
it looks like, well, there's no alpha for one. I don't know if it's because it's a PNG or,
PNG usually does have an alpha.
Yeah,
Yeah,
PNG
you
can
can
have
have
alpha.
It may not be the right transparency for this.
yeah, I know in Maya sometimes they
Uh-huh.
even think you support,
Right.
that's what I'm basing off of, I don't know anything about Unity.
They may use a special color for transparency that's
They
not
already have
fuchsia.
like
PNG.
a platform library.
PNG has an alpha channel.
Yeah, there's a platformer example, 3D,
RGBI.
first person, all that stuff. A racing game.
Like,
They've got all
there
those
we go.
examples in there.
Is this in Mordor?
Okay, so that was cool, but we kind of wanted it to get destroyed. So what I can do is do destroy and this dot game object, and then how long before it gets destroyed. So we want the audio effect is attached to that item, right? So if I want it to play, I have to kill it off like after it has time.
This.
So let's see if I can get it some time there. I can do game object.
Press.
I don't know if there's a visible property. Anyway, sorry. So now that I've got that in there and I play, it will sort of do this effect. Let's decrease my floor here.
We're going Hercules.
Yeah. You gotta test your games. You know, go just play test there. Yeah. I wonder why it's saying it's not been assigned there.
Look like it's designed.
I'm not sure.
You have the, with that in your nick too, on the start,
I don't think so.
where you have to do the, is dead.
What did I do here? I don't know. That's sort of a mystery to me right now. And I think the other thing that we needed to do was we needed to call the other stuff, right? So we needed to call base spec. Forgot about that. So that's where it'll just play the regular sound effect. I think it's bumping into something.
And the explosion
Yeah.
off top.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure that out too.
Does it have to be in your scene?
Pro.
Let's go
It
like
took me forever to understand the logic behind it.
explosion particle. I'm not sure.
At the end of this, that took me a little while longer too.
Anyway, we'll move on. See if we can figure it out later.
Yeah, I want to.
Mark in the,
So that
We'll put it in the bug tracker.
I've never looked at these before.
sign
Okay.
it to somebody else.
So, okay, so we've got a lot of stuff here. I think we've got most of the things that we wanted to do for the actual game. So now we need to add in sort of a way to keep score and to actually
That's actually
stuff
really
out.
cool.
So what I'm going to do in the scene is I'm going to create a
It's
new
procedurally generated.
GUI text. So this is a way to put text on the screen, and it's sort of relative to the actual camera position. Instead of, it's not something in, sort of in a different space than the actual scene, so that you can, it'll always be on top, right? So what we can do here is, I think this, let's see, call this one boxes, and we're gonna change this to boxes.
That one's weird.
And let's see. Maybe we can change the font. I don't know. Works okay, I guess. And then we can change where it is actually in the scene. Let's see where.
That's not what I expected it to give in.
I don't want.
So all these positions are now relative to the scene. So if it was 1, it would be all the way to the end of the scene, you know, in that direction, or the end of the camera. And if it's 0, it's at the beginning, and then right now it's 0.5, so it's in the middle relative to the position of the camera. So, let's see, 0.1, 0.2, and 0, and I'm going to say, that's good. And I'm going to create another one.
Height. Did ours stand?
And there you go. So we got how many boxes there are, how many rows you have
Can
left.
you not use the tools to drag them?
Maybe. I don't
I
know.
guess not because it didn't bunch up.
They are, let's see. It's sort of, it's not in, see, there's a reference here, but they're not really like the regular object. It's kind of this weird, I think there's a reference in the scene, but it doesn't, the positioning is relative to the camera because they're on top. It's a UI thing, not an actual thing. Okay.
Are there other UI pieces like so you can make menus and stuff?
Yeah, and actually, what's interesting is that a lot of people have built plugins. So there are people who've built like whole UI interface systems, and you can easily like kind of design it in a different UI, and not have to go through all this where you add components and everything, and you can make it have all kinds of events and stuff like that. Yep, let's see what else there was. There was GUI texture, so like you could have a picture be there as well. Okay.
Such a weird operation.
So what I think I'm going to do is create a new, just a new class, the game manager, and it'll just take care of dealing with all these things. So, or with the score and how many throws and things like that. So I can go here, say create. What the best way to do this is, and I'll just call this game manager. Okay, and so this is actually not a monolith here. It's not going to be a component. It's just going to be a class that's out there that handles this stuff. And the way I'm going to do that is have sort of a static version, a static instance of this game manager. I just need one of them per game. So I'm going to apply static game manager. So it's going to create a single instance of it. What is it, the
Singleton.
Singleton approach. So we've only got one of those. And then I can just return that single instance. So then I can use this kind of all over the place and have references to it. And then in this class, I'm going to go ahead and add those properties that we want to keep track of. So we want to private, and we're going to have box count, say 0. Should have probably copied and pasted this. And so when we're setting the value, we're going to update the UI that's associated with this. So we're kind of moving all the logic that interfaces with the GUI text into this game manager. So it's kind of encapsulated by this manager. We don't have to deal with it as much. So I'm going to do box down equals value. I'm going to store that. And then I'm going to go game object. I'm going to say box equals, and I'm going to go find the box GUI element, right? So game object dot find, and I can type in that name, so boxes. So I'm going to look up, this is looking up this GUI element called boxes, right here. And then with that box object, GUI text dot text equals, and then we'll say, you know, boxes. Box count to string. There you go. And then that's that. And then if I'm going to have, how many throws do I get to knock all the boxes to the ground? So in throw count, 0. Oops, and this should be over. Again, when I'm setting stuff, I'm going to take the same approach again, the value. I'm going to go look it up. Let's just copy it. And that's name object, row object. And row with an S. Object, thanks. So there we go. Yep.
What you got made that? John?
Yeah. Awesome. Peer programming. Okay, so we've got that. We've got throw count. And what I'm going to do is, let's go back over here and see what we need to add to these other components that we've done. On the fire component, we need to say how many, or the player input component, we need to say how many throws do they have, right? So let's do that. Let's add click and throw count. And we can say 3. The default maybe. And then when we start this game component, we can do game manager because it's an instance. We can do game manager.instance dot throw count equals throw count. And let's see what else we need to do. Every time we actually fire, we need to decrease that, right? Game manager instance dot throw count equals minus, right?
That's true.
And save that. And let's see if there's anything else. I think that's everything there. And under the box component, we want to keep track of basically every time we add a new box, it should add to that count of how many boxes are in the scene. So when it starts, we want to again do game manager instance dot box count, and we'll do ++ here. Right? So we're adding a box to the scene. And then when you destroy it, you want to say game manager instance box count minus. Let's see, how are we doing?
This. That's okay.
Any questions so far? I'm kind of running through this pretty fast. Yeah? I forgot to do over here was we need to check how many throws you actually have. Otherwise, right now you can just keep throwing and it would go down. So
it's compatible with that. So
if
it has to conform to certain
game
things.
manager
Like normally I wouldn't have a new one after here.
greater than 0. Like all that stuff, right?
That's why it has 3
I
seconds.
usually avoid that, makes sense to have it in.
See, I used to do that, but I kind of switched up just because it gives you more space.
You don't have to do this.
I think that's it.
Type down.
Type def struct.
Alright, let's see.
C++ you usually struct, instruct, and then you struct is time to it.
Sure.
Yeah. And C, you call it struct.
Okay.
Unless you type it.
So we have 2 boxes. I don't think that's
Sure.
right.
C++ you can.
100% sure.
I'm gonna look it up because
Just
Do we have 2 boxes?
try to compile.
I don't think everything will compile because it's like made up code that references things that don't exist. I just made that up for a formatting example.
You connect
That's,
to the
that's
floor.
all this is.
I'm just saying, like, you don't have to.
Ah, that was why we had that error. So we had
Like,
two
but
of
don't you
them.
have to use
Box
the keyword
component,
struct?
box component. We have it twice on
You
it.
can do it. It's backwards compatible. You don't have to.
We've
No,
got
I-
box component.
And that one has nothing on it.
Yeah, it doesn't have a DAC.
That bad
Right,
prefab.
right. So let's go and,
Doesn't matter. I
okay, so we've got one box component on that object. It's got, gun silencer, explosion, and particle effects. Let's see what. Okay, so let's save that
There you go.
and run.
I believe
You have to
this guy's
save it
not
before
here.
you run.
Right, find the internet.
No, I just saved it, just out of habit.
so true,
I think
though.
I'm used to
That's cool.
compiling and all that, but yeah. So, okay, we have 1 box and I have 3 throws. And, so let's see. Oh, I'm horrible at this game. So, right now you've got to stop and start over, you know, which isn't much fun, but there we go. Awesome. So, the only problem now is it counts down, it tells you how many throws you have, and how many boxes left. It's kind of annoying that if you run out of throws, you have to kill the game and start over. So let's go back over here in the player input, and you could say, essentially what I want to do is reload this level. So let's go with this. If input, and we'll say jump. Jump is the space bar. I think that's the only thing it is. We want to,
Can you make up your own events?
yeah, I think so. You just go in there and add to the list. I'm gonna do reset level. I'm gonna do that on the game manager, so it's over there.
Like, does that work for like, joysticks and stuff too?
I think so. I haven't had a chance to check out game pads and things like that. So yeah. Okay, so now we need to implement this reset level. So if I go back over here, actually, so I don't read any of this stuff. This is for components, right? That's that. Public void. And let's go back over there. So what we need to do is reload the level, and you can do that by using the name. So we have add another function here. Load level here. This is because I'm going to need it later for other levels, but so I'm going to call load level, and let's see. It's going to be a string, and it's going to be the level name. And so when I reset here, you reload the level by going to, well, let's reset the box count. I don't think you actually have to do this, but let's do it. And we're going to do application load level, and then the level name. So we need to keep track of what these names are and kind of which level we're on. So I'll go ahead and add another property up here. So we call it level 1, right? That's level 1. And then when I reset the level, I'm going to load level with the current level. Let's see, I think that's going to work. it's going to do that. And then I can hit spacebar, and it reloads the level. And resets. So it gives me an opportunity to reset the level. And sort of the last thing is to actually maybe go to the second level if you knock off all the objects. So we've got over here we're going to have next level. And on this player input controller, we'll have a next level property. So if you had some naming convention or whatever, like the tree level or the winter level or whatever, you can specify this in the component. So we've got string next level